I think we're on. Okay. Welcome, folks, to Supervision with Purpose, Strengthening Supported Employment and Housing Services Part 3. I am your presenter for today, Amy Banco, and I come from Rutgers University, Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. I work predominantly within the Integrated Employment Institute, helping people to get back to work, back to school, helping practitioners to develop those evidence-based practices of supported employment and support education. My work experiences also encompass the provision and supervision of supported housing. And so I'm here today to talk a little bit about working in the capacity of supervision and the supervisory role. And building some foundational approaches to our supervisory practices. For those of you that are just joining, please feel free to introduce yourself into the chat. It is great to have all of you fabulous practitioners here. I know you have so much to do in your workday. And so spending time together, learning, building your practice, that is certainly something to be acknowledged and celebrated. Thinking about today's session, it is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Healthcare Authority. And just a gentle reminder that this is an interactive training, that we encourage you to ask questions, participate throughout the session. I'm a firm believer in trying to apply content for sessions, that we learn best with active learning. And so be prepared. There will be some breakout sessions that offer you the unique opportunity to chat with a virtual colleague, to engage in the material, apply the material with people throughout your state and your service system. Please note that the use of automated note-taking bots or similar tools during the Washington FCS events or meetings require prior approval. Unauthorized use of such tools is prohibited to ensure the privacy and confidentiality of all attendees. Also, any recording that is created through AI is not recognized as an official recording of this session. We reserve the right to exit trainees from the training if they're using AI to take notes without prior approval, or using AI to record the session. And additionally, please note that materials for today, the recording, will no longer be emailed to participants. Materials will be uploaded into the chat during today's session, as well as the PowerPoint and handouts from today's session at the end of the webinar. The recording of today's session will be available on the HCA SCS channel, which is the Foundational Community Support YouTube channel, approximately 2 weeks after today's session is complete. And again, a gentle reminder, today's session is being recorded, so please keep your microphones muted unless speaking, and feel free to engage with the chat box. Also, when we think about today's session, I always kindly ask that we move with curiosity and respect, dignity for all of the wonderful, unique cultural identities that we bring into this virtual learning space. And again, a gentle call as we're moving through this series, this three-part series. Consider, how are you integrating the content into your practice, your supervisory practice? For some of you, you may be current supervisors. For other folks who've been attending, they have identified that they want to grow into supervisory positions. And for all of us here, we might be in the role of supervisee. And so we can conceptualize today's content and how we apply it to our role of supervisor, our future role of a supervisor, or what we'd like to see moving forward as supervisees within our relationships with our own supervisors. So it's a really layered approach. Feel free, as we're navigating through today's content, to be mindful of how you can apply it in those different scenarios, and you can bring those questions, comments into our discussion. And again, today's agenda, we're going to be doing a brief overview or recap of the prior sessions in terms of the foundational approaches of supervision and some communication techniques that we're going to leverage to enhance community service providers, right, in SH or SE, in terms of team cohesion and integration, team integration. We're also going to look at the role of the supervisor in that process, and how we can use these different foundational approaches to, again, support and enhance team cohesion. And when we think about team cohesion, we're really talking about, employee engagement, right? Employee engagement is looked at, as the degree to which employees feel connected and emotional attachment to the organization, how they feel about their job, and their willingness to put in the work, right, into their job. And so when we think about team cohesion, it's about connection, it's about relationships and relational practices, and ultimately enhancing employee engagement. And that can be hard work for people within community mental health programs that have that mobile outreach component, right? Mobile community programs often operate off-site or in community settings, which can create significant barriers to maintaining strong team connections. These barriers can include logistical challenges, right? In communication or service coordination due to people's geographic dispersion, times in internet access, lack of internet access, varying schedules that prevent, regular synchronous interaction among team members, or being co-located in an office, right? And that absence of team cohesion, that connection in our settings, in our service settings, can lead to some detrimental consequences or impact. We know that lack of team connection can result in professional isolation, which is a known risk factor for burnout, right? That sense of isolation can be exacerbated by the high stress nature of our mobile outreach work or community work, where practitioners may be navigating travel and meeting with multiple people in a day, right? Or just dealing with complex, scenarios or challenges in supporting someone in services, all without immediate support from colleagues, right? We're often doing one-to-one outreaches and work in the community. And that lack of peer support, right, limited opportunities for debriefing the day or challenges can increase job dissatisfaction. It can impact turnover rates. Ultimately, when that happens, we're then seeing the impact in the stability, the staff's tenure, right, and the stability of the program, that continuity of care within programs. Does that resonate with anyone and what you see in your organizations? Put a yes in the chat, a Y for yes or an N for no, right? Are you seeing, right, that connection, that lack of connection may be leading to some of these things, right? Where everyone is kind of out in the community, meeting people in service, going through their day, and that limited interaction, that lack of co-location is impacting that staff connection. What do I see coming in the chat? I see like all yeses. Yes, absolutely, Cliff. Yeah, I felt it. I was going to, two different counties in New Jersey, driving sometimes just a majority of the day, getting to and from across those counties, and I didn't see a single teammate or colleague, coworker, and it felt it some days, right? And I think we all do. When team members feel disconnected and unsupported, the quality of service can eventually start to be impacted. And that's when, that burnout comes creeping in, right? Effective supported employment services, supported housing services, right? Those interventions rely on well-coordinated and collaborative teams that share insights, strategies, and support, hopefully as close to real time as possible. Without those solid team dynamics, the consistency and responsiveness of service it might be compromised, potentially leading to impacted service provision or even suboptimal outcomes. So to get our brain kind of flowing, thinking in this regard, I'm going to put you into 3 breakout group rooms where you'll meet with a larger group, or I should say a smaller group of your virtual colleagues. And you can discuss any one of these questions with your virtual colleagues in your breakout group rooms. Share with your colleagues what strategies you currently utilize to keep your team connected or plugged in. What has been your greatest success in building team cohesion? You can talk about how often do you engage your whole team at once, or what strategies, platforms you utilize for team engagement. We'll give about 7 minutes for you guys to chat in your smaller groups and be prepared each group to maybe appoint a recorder, someone who's taking some notes, and someone who then, after we come back, is going to share a little bit, right? A recorder and a reporter. Someone who's recording what we're saying, and then someone who's going to report back what was shared. Any questions? All right, then I will see folks back in about 7 minutes. And I'll post this slide to the breakout group room so that you could see these questions. Make sure I can do that. Share to breakout group rooms. Perfect. If anyone's having trouble getting in your breakout group room, let me know. I can assist you. And we'll hit pause on the recording while we're working in these rooms. Be going over. When we think about, right, connection doesn't happen by goodwill alone, right? In complex, mobile, community-based work, connection is something that we actively design. We curate it through shared routines, predictable rhythms, like Megan was talking about, clear agreements about how we work together, starting from that onboarding process. Research across organizational psychology, right? There's a whole field on organizational psychology and healthcare, consistently shows that team cohesion is strongest when connection is embedded into the structure of work. Again, rather than relying on individual initiative or informal check-ins. And so when we think about supported employment and supported housing programs and teams, right, where staff are often dispersed, different locations, different schedules, connection really needs to be at times operationalized, parsed out, right? Not just assumed. So as Megan was noting, we want this minimum viable cadence. This is often a business term, right? And it refers to the smallest set of predictable, reoccurring team routines needed to sustain connection, coordination, shared understanding without creating an unnecessary burden or meeting fatigue, if you will, right? So that might be different for different programs, what the MVC is, right? Um, think about, your own teams, um, and what that might look like. It might look like different frequencies at different times. You may have to increase or titrate it down depending on need, depending on your composition of your team, whether you have a lot of tenured staff that have been there for some time, or you have a lot of newer staff. So think about your team for a moment. Where is connection built into your week? Where is it left to chance? Right? Where is it built in and where is it left to chance? You could put in the chat. Where is your connection built in? Where is it left to chance? Think about if someone new joined your team tomorrow, would they immediately understand how connection happens here? Right? Would they know? And so we can see in building out that minimum viable cadence, we can look at things like early morning huddles, daily huddles of 5 to 10 minutes. That could be on Zoom, it could be through text, it could be via in-person meeting if that is logistically possible. Weekly meetings, monthly meetings, right? And so we want to think about, how we work together. What are the norms when we're connecting and communicating? Clear norms reduce ambiguity and that cognitive load. right? Both strongly associated with team satisfaction and effectiveness. So what do I mean by that? What belongs in the chat versus the phone versus email versus, a face-to-face meeting? What are shared expectations for response times? I think someone was saying like, oh, what's really great about my program is that if something's going on, people are getting back right away. I think that might have been Kelly who was saying that in room two, that, people are always available and the response time is very quick, right? What is that expectation? And then having clear understanding of backup and coverage agreements, right? And so an example might be an SE team agrees that scheduling updates goes into a chat, right? Or in an SH team, they establish that shared coverage norms for housing coordination, on a Google Doc to support balance and that continuity of care, right? Teams stay connected not because individuals try harder, but because, the organization, the supervisor makes connections predictable, baked in, inevitable, right? Looking at that minimal or minimum viable cadence. So I see some things in the chat coming in. Oh, thank you, group three. Wow, you took some notes. I'm impressed. We have 30-minute cast down time between day shift, swing shift. Yes, and it has changed everything. Yes, when we expand on our communication, improve, right? That communication have the norms that this is an established practice. It can be so beneficial. I love to hear it. I love to hear it. Daily AM check-ins via Teams chat. Perfect. What's going on with the day? Biweekly one-to-ones. Built-in weekly team meeting. Love that. Weekly team meetings, one-to-ones. Yeah, a lot of crossover. Love to hear it. So you guys are already kind of in this practice. Think about what you could integrate further. Then we have this piece on creating feedback loops, right? In complex community health outreach work, supported employment, supported housing, um, we really want to look at, right, this piece on feedback loops. Culture and work culture is not what we say we value, it's what our systems repeatedly reinforce. If we don't measure cohesion, equity, well-being of staff, of our team, um, it's not that they just disappear, it's that they drift, right? They drift. And we know that when we look at organizational psychology as well as implementation science, right, looking at that literature and research, when teams are measuring and reflecting and reactive and responding to um, what they're measuring, then we can find effective practices at sustaining, right, team cohesion. And when we think about, in high intensity environments like supported employment, supported housing, where there's a lot of emotional labor, documentation pressure, other concerns, workload concerns, feedback loops might be viewed as like administrative extras, but they are in fact, protective infrastructure. When we create feedback loops to look at how people are experiencing team cohesion, their experience, right, in working on your team, right, that you're cultivating, looking at some key factors like, um, well-being, compassion fatigue. We talked about the pro-qual and looking at, um, again, that precursor to burnout, right? That can be very helpful. Think about your last team meeting, right? On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not at all confident, to 5 being most confident, right? 3 being neutral. How confident were you that everyone's voice was heard? Right? How confident are you that everyone's voice was heard in that team meeting at some point? Think about your last team meeting. On a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you that everyone's voices was heard? 1 being not confident at all, 3 being neutral, and 5 being most confident. We're extremely confident. Amazing. We have some 4s, some 3s in the chat, some more 3s. And that's great. It's great to know that things are working well. And it's curious to see if we're neutral, what's going on there? What's that about? And you can ask yourself, where do we capture that experience? What do we do with it? Right? And this is, questions that gets to the heart of some indicators regarding team cohesion, right? I'm going to put into the chat. Let's see if I can get that posted. This is a sample. A sample, oh, it's telling me cannot be sent. It's currently in use. Let's see if we can fix that. This is a sample, quick little survey for use in team meetings to get a sense of whether or not the team meeting is effective. And it is 5 simple questions that can help you using a Likert scale. It could be anonymous. You could put it on SurveyMonkey. You could use it on the different platforms that you have for surveys at your organization, or you could do paper and pencil, but it's an anonymous survey to help take the pulse of people's experience in your meetings, creating thus that feedback loop, right? That's the purpose. Helping people to better understand, right? To demonstrate value, and appreciation of people's perspectives. Um, are you able to see the PowerPoint slide? Oh, I see none in the chat. Perfect. Oh, Cameron, you said yes? Okay. Please let me know if you can't see it. But that is a sample, like quick little 5-question survey that could help, right, to look at what are staff's experience, right, in being in the team meetings. And again, what you don't measure, right, is hard to track, hard to get a sense of, and can drift. And that's well supported in literature. And so we want to get a sense of did people feel heard? Were things explicit? Was follow-up defined, right? We can get a sense of coverage equity and workload distribution, right? That is certainly something that comes up quite a bit, right? Equity and workload, especially around things like opportunities to take on professional development, additional trainings, take on committee work within the organization, or opportunities to be an organizational trainer, opportunities to work with different persons served on caseloads, right? When there's that perceived unfairness within workload distribution, right? Equity in workload distribution, we also see that that can be a predictor of burnout more strongly than overall workload volume. And so checking in on that particular aspect can be assistive, right? Again, just setting up some gentle feedback loops can be very assistive in supporting transparency, demonstrating that we are interested in people's perspectives or experience, and fostering a unified team, right? Building a work culture that demonstrates that we value working alliances with staff. And this last piece, looking at the basics of team cohesion, right? Team cohesion is often talked about as a relationship issue. And we know that in research, right, team cohesion is also a systems issue. Cohesion weakens not when people lack commitment, but when voice and opportunity and influence, again, are unevenly distributed. And again, looking at that organizational psychology, we see that equity and inclusion are not just add-ons to effective teams. They are, foundational conditions for cohesion and engagement and staff retention. And so in supported employment and supported housing programs, where teams are interdisciplinary, where we're mobile, diverse, cohesion depends on how well systems ensure that participation and opportunity are not dependent on role, identity, language, or status, right? That there's equity and inclusion, right, across the team. Think about your team meeting for a moment. Whose perspectives shape decisions most often? Is there a hierarchy, right? Whose perspectives might be present but less visible? Anything come to mind, you could put in the chat. Right? Thinking about, again, whose perspectives shape decisions most often, or whose perspectives might be present but less visible. Looking at that piece of equity inclusion. And so when we think about inclusion and supervision, um, we want to focus on how teams make decisions, how disagreements are navigated, how contributions are acknowledged, how power differences surface and are managed, right? We want to be mindful of, as supervisors, being, focused on leadership inclusivity, um, invite input from all roles, right? Publicly acknowledge people's expertise, um, be mindful of not creating unnecessary hierarchies. And that, when we come from this mindset, right, these practices can really increase participation, as well as hopefully that shared engagement and responsibility um, within our programs. Any thoughts in terms of, see something in the chat? It's still on Team Cohesion 101. You should see Team Cohesion 101 equity and inclusion are core team cohesion strategies. Is that what you guys see? Equity and inclusion are core team cohesion strategies? Yes. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, so we had three basics to team cohesion. Another piece, that we can look at is bringing it back to our restorative supervision, right? And we're going to get into that recap in a moment. Restorative supervision focuses on um, the wellness, right? The emotional toll of the work that we do and how it impacts staff. And using trauma-informed supervision competencies can be a wonderful way to build that equity and inclusion, coming from that perspective, right, of acknowledging the impact of our work and the work that we do. Avoid stigmatizing stress responses, right? Adjusting organizational supports, um, rather than blaming, staff or individuals, right? And this approach really aligns with um, building not only team cohesion, but being trauma informed. And so we want to take these basic parts of team cohesion and merge them with the work that we have done in sessions 1 and 2, right? Before we proceed, let's just kind of re-anchor ourselves in the core supervisory framework that kind of been the underpinnings of the entire series. And so we use Proctor's model. Proctor's model of supervision conceptualizes that supervisors do 3 key functions, that in every interaction that you have with your staff, you are pulling from one of these key functions, right? And these 3 functions um, include, again, restorative supervision, normative supervision, and formative supervision. Normative supervision focuses on setting and maintaining professional standards, right? It involves ensuring that supervisees understand ethical guidelines, legal requirements, all of those key organizational policies important to practice. Formative supervision is the function of a supervisor that revolves around learning and skill development, right? This is like the teacher or mentor role where we help staff to build competencies, knowledge, skills, to grow professionally, to build evidence-based practices, right? It's where we're teaching people, oh, this is how you engage in MI. This is, let's practice your CBT, cognitive restructuring skills in team meeting or in individual supervision, right? It's building out a person's service provision, evidence-based practices, their service skill sets. And then restorative supervision, again, it focuses on providing emotional support, promoting self-care. It acknowledges the emotional toll, stressors that are inherent to the work that we do, right? And aims to hopefully support staff in maintaining their wellness, their well-being, and building resilience so that they can continue doing the work, right? Supervisors utilizing this aspect of the model create a supportive environment, hopefully where staff feel safe to discuss, right, their personal, but not personal, professional, professional challenges. What I don't want to confuse restorative supervision with is counseling or service provision, right? We're not providing services for our staff, right? We have employee assistance programs, EAP for that, right? This is looking at how are we supporting wellness at work, building out, right, strategies to navigate hectic schedules, balancing time management, decompressing between sessions, debriefing after challenging sessions or events. We also want to reflect back on our second part of our foundational series, which is nonviolent communication. Nonviolent communication gives us a shared way of communicating, especially when the discussions are complex and hard. This was developed by Marshall Rosenberg, and it is a technique for us to engage in challenging conversations, to express need, listen with intent, and maintain connection while addressing real differences. When we think about nonviolent communication, it has several core elements that include stating an observation, describing what happened without judgment. So that might look like, Amy, I noticed your progress notes haven't been done within 72 hours. So observation. Second part is feelings. I feel really concerned, right? As your supervisor, I feel really concerned about that that documentation. Then there's the third part, the need. It really is important for documentation to meet our billing requirements or else we won't get paid. And then we have a request. Could we work together to figure out a solution? Right? So it's observation, feeling, need, request. And this helps us to navigate difficult conversations. I've had many supervisors who might take the approach that they would talk to someone and say, like, your notes aren't done, and they're yelling and they're angry and they're accusatory or they're judgmental. That shuts down a conversation. It doesn't build team cohesion. Using nonviolent communication is a strategic way of supporting communication as a micro intervention for team cohesion, right? People know what to expect with you as a supervisor. If there is a challenge, right, you're going to be approaching it in a collaborative way, in an open way, in a curious way to find solutions. Now, that doesn't mean that we avoid consequences, right? That conversation can certainly shift to, if I continue with those late documentations, Amy, I've noticed your documentation is still late, and I am very concerned, right? I'm very concerned because we've missed billing for multiple sessions because the documentation wasn't done in time. For this program to survive, right, we need everyone to be submitting documentation on time. We now need to move to corrective action with a follow-up plan. Can we collaborate on that? right? So it's not about avoiding responsibility. It's about a communication technique to help navigate challenging conversations that takes the emotional dysregulation out of the conversation. What do you guys think about that? Is nonviolent communication techniques? I'm going to put into the chat a checklist on how to use nonviolent communication. But is it something that you would utilize? Does it sound effective? You can put in the chat. Right. Yeah, I see some people that are saying this might be something of interest. And then our last foundational piece that we're going to pull from today for team cohesion is appreciative inquiry, right? We want to look at this as a tool um, for finding a strength-based approach to our supervisory communication, right? Most oftentimes we'll hear someone say, "What's wrong? What's not working?" Um, Puts people in a defensive mode at times. When we are problem centered, right? Or not acknowledging strengths, it can really diminish staff engagement. And so, with appreciative inquiry, instead of asking what's wrong, what's not working, we ask what is working, or when was this working, right? When we are at our best, what does that look like? When this worked well, what did that look like? What was going on? Right? Appreciative inquiry is strength-based approach to organizational communication, learning, and change, right? That focuses on identifying what's working well and how to amplify it for continued growth. And so it can be very assistive in creating um, team plans, um, helping to solve problems, to look at challenges in a strength-based lens so that people feel a little bit more hopeful and optimistic about those resolutions. So, given our overview of Team Cohesion 101 and these Proctor models that we just discussed, think about how you can use, right, some of those best practices, some of the appreciative inquiry. Think for a moment about how, I'm not going to put you in breakout group rooms right now to save some time, but think about how you might use some of this, right? The Team 101, the appreciative inquiry in normative, formative, and supervision. Think about that for a second. What might that look like? How might you use some of this? If you'd like, you can put it in the chat. When we think about normative supervision, there are a whole host of things that we can potentially build in to support team cohesion, right? Thinking back to our basic 101, we talked about having a routine, having reoccurring meetings, whether in person or virtual. And so for normative supervision, remember that's things like documentation, policies, procedures. We can start to look at opportunities for maybe collaborative team documentation time, right? If people are really experiencing some challenges, right? How do we put some source of connection together for staff to feel supported and effective in this historically like challenging um, task or job duty. We can look at peer chart reviews, right? Helping staff to support each other in bolstering, again, their documentation outside of progress notes, maybe looking at intakes, looking at goal planning, right? Lending support and encouragement to, again, help the team build skills in that normative supervision. We also see peer mentoring. I think someone had mentioned it might have been Megan who was saying earlier, right, that how we onboard people is really important. And we can certainly build peer mentorship around normative supervision and team engagement, right? Helping peer-to-peer people learn about, again, the process of doing documentation, policies and procedures, all of those norms and expectations. I think I see something coming in the chat. Hold on one second. supports consistency, team building, communication, and clear expectations. Absolutely. Yeah, those are very important for normative supervision. Great point, Mike. We can offer structured reflection time during meetings, during our weekly team meetings. Maybe it's a few minutes where we can reconnect and discuss some of this normative lens, right? Whether it's upcoming policy changes, modifications, suggested policy changes, looking at ethics and guidelines, checking in with documentation, or looking at even developing normative um, team goals, right? What that would look like. Anything else? Else that you could think of supporting, right, this normative supervision piece and team engagement, how to get everyone kind of connected, engaged, collaborating on this piece of normative supervision or that normative function. We can also, again, look at this lens of formative supervision and team engagement um, by being, again, very creative with our interventions or approaches. We can look at things like reflective team supervision conversations, where we talk with the team about, again, things that fall into formative supervision during the team meeting. That would be in regards to skill development. Maybe the team wants to chat a little bit about, right, the experience using certain evidence-based practices. Maybe there are challenges with landlords that the team would like some um, skill building around, or maybe there is, challenges with job coaching that the team is identifying for um, certain staff challenges around on-site job coaching. And there can be time carved out to reflect and build on those practices. Team-based service consultation, service conceptualization, where people are building on each other's strengths, sharing ideas on how to support, right, a person in service. Um, or you can look at um, shared skill building agendas, right? Or peer learning sessions, communities of practice within your program or your organization. I know I had one community of practice for vocational providers, right? Where all vocational providers got together and we worked on building skills across different program modalities. So we had supported employment workers with supported housing workers that were doing vocational service. We had PACT workers coming in who were doing vocational services, and a partial care counselor who was the vocational provider, all coming in to do some of this like team formative supervision. It was this really great community of practice that was sustained for several years because people enjoyed coming together and supporting each other in those unique roles. We can also do, in terms of additional formative supervision, connection with team engagement, doing group role plays or different vignettes and scenarios where people get to, work out challenges collaboratively and hopefully in engaging ways or co-developing team learning goals, right? Um, Using strength-based feedback that highlights collective practice, right? All of these are really great suggestions or potential opportunities to build on team engagement within the domain of formative supervision, right? Think about the last time when your team learned something together, not in training, but maybe in the flow of your work, right? The flow of your team meeting. Um, right? That is a moment where formative supervision is occurring, right? It may not feel like it sounds so formal when I say formative supervision, but those certainly are moments where formative supervision within the group is happening, and that builds that team cohesion, right? When people are learning together, when they are supporting one another's learning, right? And then lastly, restorative supervision. And that's not about just providing, staff our own counseling services. Again, that would be unethical. It's about fostering environments and interactions that allow teams to actively manage the emotional toll of the work that we do. Right. In Proctor's model, that restorative supervision piece focuses on how teams are supported to absorb, process, and recover from that emotional impact of our work. And so when we think about restorative supervision and team collaboration, we can also pull in team-based reflective spaces, right? Monthly or periodic opportunities where teams reflect on how the work has um, how they've been managing the work, how they are building in self-care throughout the day, debriefing as needed, right? Using shared language to acknowledge, right, that emotional residual impact, using the ProQual, the professional quality of life, which is a validated tool to check in for burnout, for compassion fatigue, compassion satisfaction. We can support each other in collective wellness exercises, right? Whether it's grounding exercises, mindfulness meditations, right? Doing these collectively within the group, carving out, time in a team meeting, carving out time on a weekly call or that 10-minute huddle in the morning, right? Setting the tone for the day where the supervisor is saying, let's care for ourselves in intentional ways. That builds team cohesion. And then I think someone mentioned acknowledgement, recognition. Recognition is not about awards always or performance incentives. It can be, but not always, right? In restorative supervision, recognition is a relational practice, right? That helps teams, I think, ultimately, um, it, again, it's when I say relational practice, right? Um, it's that provision of services through this mindset um, that we need to first and foremost develop and maintain that warm and responsive relationship, and that comes through with recognition and acknowledgement, right? That way that we honor the hard work of staff, their persistence, their commitment to the mission, the value of the work, or their embodiment of, the values and principles of supported employment, or the values and principles of supported housing, right? So when we think about recognition, it really matters for team cohesion. In the work that we do, much of it, you know, much of that work, the outcomes can be invisible, right? Incremental. Our work can be emotionally demanding. There can be a lot of systems constraints. Um, and so when that labor and those issues go unnamed, teams can be vulnerable to emotional exhaustion or disengagement. And restorative supervision through recognition really helps to validate effort, not just outcomes, reinforces our shared purpose and values, right? Countering, I think, that erosion that comes from repeated systems barriers, right? Recognition, when embedded into team cohesion and supervision, our team routines really helps people to feel seen and not evaluated. And so, this could look like acknowledging collective efforts and persistence, naming values and action, you're really demonstrating a lot of care and empathy in working with this, particular job seeker or helping this particular tenant as they navigate an eviction. We can do things like I had the MVP of the week for my team years ago, and that was the most valuable practitioner, and the team got to kind of vote on who they wanted to acknowledge and why. And sometimes it was something related to, oh, someone got a job, and other times it was, you know, we had a challenge with our vehicles, our fleet of vehicles, and this person really stepped up and was collegial, and because they of their collegiality, right, we solved the problem. How does that sound for folks? Is this something that you're actively engaging in, these pieces of recognition to build that team cohesion? You could put in the chat Y for yes, N for no. And this last piece that we want to focus on is that communication is a micro intervention, right? Um, our language can be a choice that can either preserve connection or cause disconnection. It can reinforce safety or destabilize safety. It can strengthen cohesion or it can detract from cohesion. So, my question to you is what types of conversations are you having? Right? And this is from the Appreciative um, Inquiry, AI, Appreciative Inquiry, right? We're looking at what adds value when we communicate, sharing ideas, shining lights on assumptions, augmenting others' contributions, generating solutions, advocating for possible actions, acknowledging other people's contributions, pointing out opportunities. These types of conversations, right, tend to be energizing and create like upward spiral effect of confidence or optimism. They stimulate meaningful engagement and inspire, innovative thinking, positive action. Right, appreciative conversations, as you see on this spectrum, elevate thinking, create connection, and team cohesion. What detracts, what devalues or depreciates, right, the experience of others? Conversations that include that devalue, right, a situation, a person, an opportunity, and it looks like judging, belittling someone's contributions, criticizing someone's contributions, advocating for own ideas only without listening to the opinions of others, dominating conversations, ignoring contributions, continually pointing out why things won't work, or using blame and shame. These types of conversations weaken connection, strain the team, hinder, right, progression, and hinder, again, building a cohesive, functioning team. So we want to be very mindful, right? How are we in our conversations? Additionally, are our conversations inquiry-based or statement-based? Right? Questions can be generative, grounded in curiosity, aiming to expand awareness, to build on knowledge, to make space for new ideas or opportunities, to deepen understanding. These types of questions build connection, build understanding, awareness, add value, again, are appreciative. Or questions can arise from a place of judgment, of bias, of criticism. Often they can be rhetorical or devaluing, pejorative, right, depreciative in nature, and disempowering. Right, statements-based interactions can be also declarative. Statements can add value, or they can unfortunately devalue. Right, value adding can statements are positive things about people and situations, highlighting important aspects that have positive impact, right, on the situation or the person, whereas depreciative statements are going to be based on criticism and blame, or negativity, right? And so we want to be mindful of what quadrant we're in. Where are we at when we're talking with our team? Um, and if we're finding a pattern that is disempowering, disengaging, critical, how do we move away from it? So, examples to lean into our appreciative inquiry based questions can look like: when did our team work especially well together? What helped us feel aligned as a team? When did communication feel easiest or clearest for us? When did we support each other in a way that mattered? What helped us maintain connection even when the work was hard? Again, these are not statements, they're inquiries, and they're strength based, right? They're looking at what worked well and how can we replicate it. And now I'm going to ask for the next, I'd say, 7 minutes to go back into our groups, and we're going to put it all together. We are going to take what we learned today. You'll see a Word doc, or excuse me, a Google Doc in our chat. I have 4 scenarios. I think we had three breakout group rooms. So I'm going to ask that each of you in your breakout group room um, use the corresponding scenario to apply some of this work that we just reviewed. So room one, please look at scenario one. Room two, look at scenario two. And room three, look at scenario three. And it'll give you a brief, very common experience, whether on an SE or SH team. And you'll be able to consider with the prompts, how would you use appreciative inquiry or nonviolent communication to begin a discussion on this particular scenario? Okay, thank you so much for processing the last exercise and putting it all together. Now I put into the chat a survey for today's session. Please feel free to provide that feedback in terms of your experience of today's session. And certainly I'd like to give an opportunity if anyone has any questions from today's session. Any questions?
No, I
Outstanding.
appreciate it. I think this was some good things to keep in mind. I mean, great highlights and spotlights on effective supervision and team communication and just troubleshooting when needed to support or areas of growth. It's really important. So I like the consciousness of team and being conscious of those different things. It was good.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing about your experience and what you're taking away with you. I feel like it can be really hard to keep all the balls that we're juggling, up in the air. And it can be challenging to give a lot of thought and intentionality to team cohesion and communication. And so hopefully this is some really applicable stuff that you can bring into that area.
Yeah, and learning your players is important, right? One communication technique is you just
Yeah,
it's not straight across the board. You got to get to know the people on your team. You're going to be able to approach somebody, one individual, in a whole different way compared to possibly how you address something with someone else, and that's just the whole part of being in a leadership role. It's got to know your players.
of course, that is absolutely a key piece, right? And it goes back to one of the comments we had earlier, that team cohesion starts during the hiring process and building a team, right, that aligns with the um, program and organization's missions and just continuing to cultivate that. I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well,
I
thank you
had a
so
I had
much.
a question about resource like reference material, books that we can read to kind of expand
Yes,
our learning around bringing our team together.
I would recommend some of these resources listed here. I know we pulled from the Appreciative Inquiry work. That is the Starvos and Toros book. That is a recent book that I definitely would recommend. There's, I think, a couple of resources on counseling supervision. The older Starvos book on appreciative inquiry and how to use it for being change agents as leaders. So definitely feel free to pull from this list here and to build out some additional skills and competencies. Great question. Anyone else? And please feel free to complete the survey. We want to thank DBHR for funding the series. Again, our monthly sessions occur the third Wednesday of every month. And I look forward to seeing you hopefully in some future sessions.